And joining us now to talk about that call and the U.S. strategy in Ukraine is the Vice Chair of the Intelligence Committee, Republican Senator Marco Rubio of Florida. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. So you and this bipartisan group of lawmakers had this Zoom call with President Zelensky yesterday. What was the meeting like? What message did he have for you?
Well, I think he reiterated the same points he's been making repeatedly to the public. You know, obviously they want to get more aircraft, which I think the United States is supportive of, and countries are willing to do. There's complications that come with it. It's not just as easy as handing it over. You got to fly those in. You got to station them somewhere on the ground. And as you saw this morning, the Russians have launched anywhere between 8 to 12 rockets at an airport in the sort of west of Ukraine. And that's just a part of a strategy to deny them places to move that airframe. So one thing is having the planes, and then another thing is being able to use them. Those things require munitions, and you also have to be able to fly them and not get shot down. Now that said, the Russian Air Force had a pretty bad day yesterday too, so neither side really has any sort of air superiority right now. But look, I'm for it. I just want everyone to understand that it's not a magic solution. There are complications that come with it.
You tweeted a photo of Zelensky during the virtual meeting. Democratic Congressman Dean Phillips said that the Ukrainian ambassador had explicitly asked lawmakers not to share anything on social media until after the meeting ended, just for Zelensky's security. Is that true? Was it a mistake for you to tweet that picture?
Well, first of all, she asked that like 30 minutes into the call after I had already done it. The second is I think she's under the impression that no one knew that call was happening. You know, that call had been widely reported. Actually, the specific time had been reported. There were over 300 people on it. All the call details had been emailed. So there was nothing secure about that call. And the picture is just a nondescript picture. It looks just like every of the other ones that you've seen out there publicly. So there's no risk posed, but you know, you're always going to have a couple of people that want their name in an article somewhere and mentioned in the press. So,
Russia captured the key city of Kherson this week. It continues to close in on other major cities in Ukraine. A senior Western intelligence official tells CNN that Moscow could soon move to, quote, bombard cities into submission. How bad are you anticipating the next few days will be? Is there anything that Congress can do right now, anything that the president could do right now to save lives?
Well, obviously, look, if there's an opportunity to move civilians and move innocents out of those places, we should be supportive of that. Mariupol this morning is an example of how the Russians never keep their word. They're never going to allow any of this. And in fact, to the extent they do allow humanitarian corridors, I worry that they're doing it to set up false flags where they can then attack that and argue that the Ukrainians did it, or you know, whatever it is they want to make up. But let me just say, what do you expect to see? I, unfortunately, ask people to look at the images of what they did in Chechnya in '99 or what they did in Syria more recently. They will destroy and level entire cities because they terrorize the population into either submission or into fleeing. This is a tactic they have used, and I fear that they'll use here increasingly because they're having massive logistical challenges, especially in the northern and north-central part of the country.
You tweeted that you could, quote, can't emphasize enough how much Putin and his risk calculus have changed, unquote. Could you go into some more detail about what you mean by that? And do you think the Western response has been effective in getting him to at least reconsider what he's doing?
Well, first let me say, actually, the Western response leading up to this invasion is exactly what I'm pointing to as people not fully understanding it. Most of the countries, including the Ukrainian government, but most of the countries in Europe didn't believe he would invade. It just made no sense to them. They thought the risk calculus for him was not good. What they don't recognize is this guy is now almost 70 years old. He realizes he's in the backstretch. He probably feels that his legacy is not yet complete unless he can restore Greater Russia, which has to include Ukraine at least under his thumb, if not occupied by it. Yesterday he began to make assertions to them losing their statehood. And so as a result, you see a person that's now engaged himself in a conflict that he can't win. He is now engaged in a conflict where he's either going to have a costly military victory followed by a costly occupation that he can't afford, or he's going to get caught in a long-term military quagmire at the same time as he's facing a second front, which is an economy in free fall in his own country. So the combination of these two things, I think, puts us in a very dangerous place, and that is he's going to have to do something, some escalation, some amplification of this crisis in order to restore strategic balance, in his view, with the West. And I'm worried about what those things could be.
On Thursday, your Republican colleague, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, openly called for someone in Russia to assassinate Vladimir Putin. He wrote, quote, "Is there a Brutus in Russia? Is there a more successful Colonel Stauffenberg in the Russian military? The only way this ends is for somebody in Russia to take this guy out. You would be doing your country and the world a great service, unquote. Do you agree with Senator Graham?
Look, people are watching these images, all right? They're seeing what's happening there and people being murdered and suffering. It makes you angry, and you want something to happen. And you reach the conclusion, boy, wouldn't it be great if someone internally just took this guy and eliminated it? So that's not the official policy, obviously, of the United States. No one's talking about the U.S. doing it. I would say that at some point, I do think Putin's going to be removed from power. I really think the chances of that happening are high, and him losing his power, hopefully to stand trial for war crimes, for what he's done. I know, Lindsay will have to answer for what he meant by that, other than to say I think he's expressing sort of the frustration that a lot of people have that these horrible things are happening, and it doesn't seem to be anything we can do that immediately brings an end to it, and it's very frustrating for people.
You've introduced legislation to ban the import of all Russian oil to the U.S. There is growing bipartisan support for that idea on Capitol Hill. Secretary of State Blinken just told me that the Biden administration is seriously discussing it. Americans are already dealing with high gas prices. Should they prepare for that to get even worse in order to stand up to Putin?
Well, first of all, let me just say that the fact that people believe that not buying Russian oil, not having Russian oil would raise our gas prices is actually very concerning, because that proves that Putin has the leverage and the power over America to raise our gas prices anytime he wants. So we shouldn't allow that to continue. We should not allow Vladimir Putin to have the power at any moment to raise gas prices on Americans by cutting us off at some point now or in the future. So we should cut them off now and replace it with American oil and have a buffer in between the time that that production starts up and the time that we make the cutoff, and we can use our strategic reserves for that. That's what I hope we will do. I hope that's where the administration's headed, but it makes no sense whatsoever to continue to buy oil from Russia that they use to fund this war and this murderous campaign that they're undertaking.
Former Trump National Security Council Russia expert Fiona Hill recently decried Russia's full-spectrum information war to, quote, soften up the enemy. She said that Fox anchors and Donald Trump were doing Russia's job for Russia, according to Hill. She said, quote, the fact that Putin managed to persuade Trump that Ukraine belongs to Russia, that's a major success for Putin's information war. He has got swaths of the Republican Party, and not just them, some on the left as well as on the right, masses of the U.S. public saying, good on you, Vladimir Putin, or blaming NATO, or blaming the U.S. for this outcome. This is exactly what a Russian information war and psychological operation is geared towards, unquote. Now, you've made a point, Senator, these last few weeks of trying to explain to Floridians, trying to explain to the American people why we should care about Ukraine and how evil Putin is. Do you think you also need to decry the folks that Fiona Hill says are doing Putin's job for him?
Well, look, there are not a lot of people left out there talking that way, and that's the first part of it. I think a lot of it, frankly, is a lot of people didn't fully understand what this was all about. So there are always going to be voices and interviews I see from time to time where, for example, there was a time where people were arguing, why are we getting involved in Ukraine? All we have to do is agree that they never become part of NATO and we can avoid all this. So that was never true. And I made it a point to say that's just not true. So, again, look, this is a country where people have the freedom to have any views they want. We're not Russia. We're not China. And we don't want to be. People have the right to have those views. But I think we have a responsibility, those of us who believe differently and know the truth, to go out there and argue the counterpoint. And that's what we've done, and I think quite effectively. If you look at the numbers today and how Americans feel about Ukraine today, there's simply not a lot of space for those who argue that Putin is some sort of heroic figure. And I don't see a lot of voices other than in the far fringes making arguments to the contrary.
The Vice Chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, thank you so much, sir. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks.